Welcome to the deep end. This is our 339th deep end. And wow, what a journey it's been. And I want to welcome my co-host, Marianne Rudis, who lives in Spokane Valley, Bob Hayes, who lives all the way over there at the other end of the country in Florida. We're both getting a lot of heat these days. Now today, I want to go where the paradox kisses its own ass, where the universal constant and humans come into this difficult confrontation: change. Believe it or not, out of all our episodes, this is the 5th episode having to deal with change. Why? Because how can you not come back to change? I'm not the same person now I was at the beginning of these podcasts. That's for sure. Now, change is the essence of life. So why is it so difficult for us to change when we know that change is the main constant in play? Whether quitting smoking, losing weight, enacting laws, or adapting to our ways in the face of climate change, it is difficult, even when we know our health and maybe even our existence is on the line. Of course, there is forced change. That's trauma, that's a death of a loved one, tornadoes, war, where we are wrenched from our way of life into a transformed world, and it's, do or die. But what makes a person change? Inspiration, effort, commitment. It's important to see that change is a process of transforming, altering, and becoming different. Now, life is a series of changes, of transitions and passages from one way of being to another. For me, the great recalibrations in my life: boot camp, university, family, kids. Oh my God, talk about your life changing in a moment. You see, we want to, and I have to say this, I have to confess, retirement has been one of the most difficult changes for me, and it's taken me a while to lay hold of who and what I wanted to become. I wanted to become fully engaged in the world. I want this continually changing contemplation of what is real, what constitutes health and wholeness. I want to be engaged in that. And to be honest, if we don't see a reason for change, what happens is the response is called fear. It pushes it away. And fear, we're going to see, it disguises itself. Regrettably, discomfort is necessary for so many to confront our comfort and laziness, to keep us from what is necessary. Over and over. These are things I've had to look at. And when I really look in my study about what leads to change, I call them the 4 hurts, or the 4 enoughs. You have to hurt enough, see enough, learn enough, and receive enough. If you do that, you begin to see the necessity for your own change in your world. And studies support that not all are able to change. For me, helping to see the flow of change in my own life and to facilitate that change in the direction of health and wholeness and keep my contemplation going on what constitutes health and wholeness, it's growth. And this is integral in my mind to our spiritual happenings, our spiritual play, if you will. Growing in life is what it is about. And to me, I would like to see more human stories, and I think we're getting them slowly but surely, about change, where change is integral to life itself. How do we befriend change? How do we befriend uncertainty to become more a part of the stories of our personal narratives of change? And we have to shift our narratives in order to change. Now, when it comes to change, it seems that many times stories lead the way, and I think that's what's happening here. I think about They Call Me Mr. Tibbs. I think about those early movies where racism was being confronted. So even as we change in life, even as change is life, change is hard. It is stressful. It is upsetting. And, again, change is hard. If we look at it neurologically, the neurologists find that the difference between change in the brain is the same difference with pain and negative thinking. And what happens is there's all these processes and forces that are keeping us from change, even though change is the very foundation of what it is. Because change threatens our sense of identity. If I change, I won't be me anymore. And we're full of all these excuses. And I want to say, if you're the same person now as you were 5 years ago, I'm sorry. Life is passing you by. Our comfort, our laziness, our age, our fear, not being taught to be adaptable, our negative outlooks on life, our very habits and the system of habits we perform, our own knowledge, our lack of clarity, or maybe too much clarity. Change. How can we better embrace it and live in it in a growthful way? To me, that is the whole issue. One of my favorite lines is from a Crosby, Stills and Nash tune, and it goes, "Don't let the past remind you of who you are not now." I love that. Now, there's a remnant thread that is central to my sense of self and being. But all around that is this huge thing of change. And I have to look at what is the big thing. Am I helping to drive that change like a charioteer in a direction that's good? Or am I using these forces against change in order to make excuses and justify? That's been my retirement issues. And I started by saying change is the essence of life, which is common knowledge. But Reinhold Niebuhr completed that. He said, change is the essence of life. Be willing to surrender what you are for what you can become. John F. Kennedy said, change is the law of life, and for those who only look to the past or the present are certain to miss the future. And one of my favorites by Abraham Maslow, in any given moment we have two options: to step into growth and change or step back into safety. And it's not easy. It's not easy. And I want to reiterate that over and over, because change it's wrenching. Even when we're doing it in little steps, it's very difficult. So today, I want to talk about how important change is, how important it is for us to be part of that change and not let it do us, if you will. So how can we do that, and what does constitute change in the direction of health and wholeness? So given that, I'm going to first turn it over to Marianne Rudis. I've just thrown a whole bunch out there, Marianne. Change, I know your life has been full of all kinds of change. What do you say in this?
Well, I think there is that whole idea that change is the one constant, because things don't stay the same. And you mentioned if you're the same person you were 5 years ago, then I honestly, I'm not sure that's possible. I think that we're always in a constant river of change. But I think what we can do to stifle that is hold on to beliefs. And when we hold on to beliefs that we're not willing to question, and that then our thinking stays the same, and we refuse to change our thinking, I think that's where we get stagnated and stuck. And I think it's also a source of unhappiness, and which is why there are a lot of unhappy people in the world right now. But I think that to embrace the idea that the unknown, change is the unknown, and we want to go back to what we know, even if it's not necessarily pleasant. We want to repeat those same patterns and live our lives in the same way that we did before. And to be able to embrace the idea that something can be different, it is embracing the unknown. It's embracing uncertainty. It's stepping into something that willingly stepping into something. And I think all of us vacillate back and forth between the known and the safety and security and making those small incremental changes. And as you mentioned, sometimes those changes come out and they hit us hard from outside, and we have no choice. But even when that happens, we still have to change how we see the world, how we think about the world, what we believe is what we believe to be true. And that's where I think everything stems from, because it's scary. It's scary to give up long-held beliefs, and to maybe embrace the idea that, that may not be the best way to be in the world. That may not be the best. Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling a bit, because I'm in a river of change right now, just kind of churning, and still trying to kind of put my finger on it and figure it out. There's a lot going on.
Well, for what it's worth, Adrienne Rich, who I love, said the moment of change is the only poem. And that's helpful for me, because, dissonant pieces, in my band, I say, if you hit a wrong note, it's just a passing tone, just a passing note. If you hear it's wrong, move on to the next note. And I want to just comment, sometimes intellectual change or change in belief is where it starts. But if it doesn't move and actually change our behavior and actually create something new, it's basically just jerking off in my mind. I don't know if I hit the profane.
But I think I think it has to start there, and I think that once it starts there, then it's inevitable. It's almost like a cause and effect. It's going to have to change your behavior.
Yeah, Bob, what say you on this?
Well, like everything that I try and think about and try and understand. For me personally, it always comes down to thinking in terms of systems. And
in terms of what?
Systems.
Oh, okay.
And the universe is made up of systems, and when they get to a certain level of complexity, they become living systems. And we've talked about this many times, how once a living system becomes very, very complex, then it can become a self-aware system. The thing about living systems, they're always involved in change, because in order to remain viable, they have to take in energy, they have to change that energy into something. Talk in terms of food, the system takes food in, breaks it down, takes the nutrients that it needs, reconfigures those, gets rid of what it doesn't need. And this is a constant source of change for it. In complex living systems, where we get to the area of self-awareness, it also involves in information, taking in information, restructuring that information, and fitting it into our existing or changing worldview.
He'll give an example of that in our society.
All right. Let's go back about 100 years when people were saying it's impossible for humans to travel more than 20 miles an hour because the human body can't take it. And then people started inventing automobiles, and they started inventing race cars that were traveling at hundreds of miles an hour. And that information had to be taken in and changed everything about the way we were looking at the world. And that change in viewpoint created new industries, created new ways of looking at ourselves and our relationship to the world. And this is happening all the time, which leads me to my final point. And I know I'm rambling a little bit too, Marianne, but one of the things in complex systems that is just beginning to be understood, and that's the concept of emergence. When things are so complex and something is introduced into that system, whether it's a new idea or a new type of food or whatever, there can emerge a new structure, a new configuration that has never been before. And that's where creativity, new ideas, and new ways of dealing with the environment happen.
And I want to try to bring this down to a personal thing. Those are great intellectual models. But the fact is, I am going through huge changes right now. And part of these podcasts are basically on the front end of my own spiritual journey. Bob, in terms of systems, the thing that keeps coming to my mind is Jim Crow. Jim Crow worked really well in the South, if you were white. And the huge systemic change that happened was wrenching for human beings. It's not an intellectual. It's not, what did someone say to Henry Ford? What do people want? She said faster horses. There's this whole thing. I still tune in to some worship services of some of my colleagues. I don't listen to them, but I realize there's 8 people in the congregation. One of the pastors literally does a morning Bible reflection. When he's on vacation, he still does it. You see, this is the place where, to me, something hasn't gotten through yet. It hasn't disrupted the change. I think there are huge political changes that have happened that have created a huge backwash to that change, if you will. Again, the big one is fear. The big one is, if I do that, I won't be me anymore. How can I be good to black people? That doesn't make sense to me. I'm a better person than them. All these things have shifted, and some of them just don't like it. And I want us to see that the whole concept of change is on us. And, I'll put it back to you, Bob. You retired a couple years ahead of me. Name 2 huge changes that changed your behavior in the world since you've retired, and how that happened.
Well, probably the biggest change was my level of frustration. When I was working, I was so frustrated at the barriers that were thrown up in front of me by the bureaucracy immersed in, that wouldn't allow me to get to the goals I was trying to achieve. And within days of retiring, my wife told me that I was a different person, that she could tell the level of stress had changed, my posture, my tension, and so forth. And so I think that's the biggest change. The other, I have to come up with a second one, the other is just being able to make my own schedule, do what I wanted when I wanted to do it, was a refreshing change for me. But I wanted to just say one thing. Change is happening within this system, but there's a countervailing force called homeostasis, that the system is trying not to change. It's trying to stay where it was. So it's perfectly natural to have people resist new ideas because you can label it fear or whatever, or just a natural occurrence within them as a system that they are trying to stay the way they were. Now, but everything can be boiled down to a personal level if you think about it enough. And I'm dwelling in this intellectual thing. You've known that for years and years, and I've kind of got to the ivory tower mentality. That, you are able to kind of drag me back to the real world.
Well, and I think the whole concept of status quo, there is a tensive piece there between the change that's calling us and the status quo and all the things that make that up. However, that's called life. That's that between the two and how we do it. I mean, over and over, I see people who they keep doing the same thing over and over, thinking it's going to change. Yet, the very thing we dread may be our salvation. I can't remember who said that.
Well, I think listening to you guys talk, I keep thinking of, you've got, change for the sake of change may not always be the best thing, because sometimes there are things that we want to keep. And so measured, directed changes. Isn't that the whole idea with conservative and liberalism? Conservative in the past represented the status quo, that homeostasis, that, the tried and true, where the more progressive is like, no, we need to change this, we need to do this. And that there is this, I love that you talked about that emergence, because there is this fear of what are the unintended consequences? What are the things that are going to occur because of all these changes that we may not be able to accept or to grapple with? And so the idea that something else is possible, and in order for that to be realized, we have to let go of the past and change what we're doing and the way we're doing it.
Well,
it's
go ahead.
Wide open, yeah.
And to me, what you're bringing into to focus a little more, which you're really good at, is discernment. That we are co-creatives. And, everything I've read says you don't want change to do you. You want to do change. You want to meet it on the field, if you will. Now, again, some of the traumatic and wrenching things, people right now, their houses are getting flooded. Tornadoes and hurricanes are knocking them down. Life will not be the same for those people, not for a long time. And this discernment of how we decide what change we're going to entertain. And I'm talking about that, not the traumatic kind that we have no call over. And how do we meet that change? And this is why I kind of made a pitch for more narratives, more stories that make uncertainty our friend, and how we befriend uncertainty. I think uncertainty can be toxic if we don't have a perspective of discernment. We can be going in every direction all over the place. And I've known New Age people, they're one religion one week and another religion the next week. And, it's all because things change. And they're on the road. Go ahead, Bob.
But, you bring up the idea of when we're going to change and why we're going to change and why we don't change and so forth. And you look at these tragedies, floods and so forth. We had the opportunity as the human race 40, 50 years ago to make the changes that would have avoided a lot of the tragedies we're experiencing today. And the stories that we tell, it's like the number one story on the news, the national news every night, is now the latest natural disaster, whether it's a flood or a tornado or a hurricane or whatever. That didn't happen when we were kids. You hardly ever heard a weather report on the national news. And now it's the number one story. And in my opinion, again, as radical as it may be, every time they record a news article, instead of just going in and interviewing somebody and saying, oh, I've lost everything, what am I going to do? Say, well, what do you think about climate change? What do you think about the actions we could take to avoid these kind of things in the future? And I'm not hearing those stories enough.
Well, there are stories that are emerging. if you will. And I think they're not just about the climate change. They're about the nuclear situation. They're about the world is becoming a tinderbox of conflict and tension. They're a huge thing, the virus issue, how to stay ahead of that. We don't know what's going to pop up next and where. And all those things are huge changes facing us that the human family must somehow embrace and get over. What was it Alan Watts said? Let me see if I can find it real quick. The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. And that's kind of my view. Is like, what in God's name is happening now, and how did we get here? So, well, believe it or not, we're coming to the end of our time. Final comments, Bob?
Well, let me just wrap up what I was saying before. These news reporters every evening are telling stories. How are they going to frame those stories so that we get the numbers needed to make the change that's necessary?
Yeah. And I will just say that there are some news people that refuse for their weather folks to even talk about climate change. They have to report the weather. They don't want that bigger picture, which is a whole other issue. But I had to say it. Mary Ann, final comments?
Okay, well, you just had my brain going down the media spiral, and I'm going to try and stay away from that because I've got a lot to say about where the media is at right now. But, as far as change goes, I think that once we accept that it's a part of our lives, and I loved the Alan Watts quote. He's one of my favorites, and just we are in it. That we can't stop it, and so and it always goes back to what do we do with it? And when these disasters happen, when our world gets turned upside down, the only thing that we have any kind of control over is how we're going to see that and how we're going to think about that and what we're going to do. How are we going to act? And so I think that's where that getting your head straight on is first, and then you step into action.
Amen. And I think action is the big term here in my mind. One of my mantras has always been, I don't want to be the kind of person who tells people what I'm going to do right before I don't do it. And that action piece is huge. And one of the things that keeps coming around for me is the loopiness of life. And I want to address the loopiness of life. And when I say that, I mean, some things come full circle. There's closure. It's an amazing process to see these loops in your life. And I'll be honest, I kind of see everything as loops. Loops within loops within loops within loops. And my thinking goes in these loops, and they're part of bigger loops. And I want to, for some sense, I've been reflecting on what are the places in my life that have come full circle, and how did that happen? And, is that grace? Is that intent? I don't know, but I'll tell you this loopiness of life, this things working away. What did Paul McCartney say? It's a long and winding road. It is, but they're going in circles, man. And, hopefully it's a widening gyre over and over as we move a spiral into higher orders of perception, higher orders of living, higher orders of spiritual sensibilities. How do we move into that? How do we start talking about that and make sense of those and even begin to describe them in a way that allows us to talk about them? I'm hoping that we'll be able to lay some hold on that in our next episode of The Deep End. Until then, my friends, be well and be blessed, and know that we are one.